Okay, we are live. Good morning, everyone. Lisa here with A Day in Our Shoes, Don't IEP Alone. I am starting promptly on time today. Both my guest and I have another commitment at 11 o'clock, so we also will be ending promptly, if not a little bit early. With me today is Samantha Feinman. She's the director of New Frontiers in Learning, which is an organization that provides individual coaching, instruction, and support to middle school, high school, college students, and adults of all ability levels. Her experience includes supporting clients at the secondary and post-secondary levels, as well as experience working directly with families to assist in the transition and career exploration processes. But why I have her here today is she is an executive functioning coach, and I know that's always been a hot topic. Well, first, let's let you introduce yourself, Samantha.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Samantha. I'm glad to be here. I am a speech therapist and trained special education teacher and have been working in the field of education for quite some time now, elementary school, as well as middle school and at the college level. I really went into looking at executive functioning in particular when I was faculty at a university in New York City, where we were seeing a lot of undergraduate students coming to the college environment that had the intellectual capacity to do very high level work academically, but some things were falling through the cracks for them and they were struggling. And so we started to see the same patterns of behavior time and time again with these students that sometimes when they're in high school and transitioning to college, we look at them and we say they're failure to launch. Or sometimes they're the ones that go to college, they're unsuccessful for a semester and have to go home, or unsuccessful for a couple of semesters and have to go home, and we're not quite sure, or they're not quite sure why they're struggling, or what the difficulty is. So we started to look at those students in particular, and what we found was that they all had the same pattern of really demonstrating weaknesses in the areas of executive function. So that's where I started to really look at it, and starting with the college age and then really moving down to high school and middle school. And we see many times that students start struggling with these skills as early as upper elementary school and middle school. So I'm happy to be here. Happy to take questions about it and kind of give you some information about things that we see, or patterns that students are struggling with, and how families, parents, teachers, educators, whomever can help to develop these skills early on, to help create for an independent learning experience.
Great. I was introduced to the concept of executive functioning skills when I first became an advocate, thankfully, and it wasn't something I had really thought about. And it's definitely one of those things where if it's present, I think you take it for granted if you have decent executive, but when they're absent, you certainly notice them. And then I find that a lot of parents can't really define that. They know what they're seeing, and then I say, well, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And then they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, okay, you have executive functioning issues on your hands.
Yeah, I mean, and I see, I think part of the issue is that, they're really internal cognitive processes. So it's not something that we see on the outside. And sometimes the behaviors that are exhibited due to executive function weakness can mask what sometimes we'll see parents, they'll think, my son or daughter is just lazy, or they're not motivated to do the work, when the reality is that the processes that they're struggling with are internal and they're cognitive. And so it's very hard for us to see that when these processes, especially as parents, if they come naturally to us, or we've developed strategies so that we can be successful in these areas, but our children are struggling, it's hard for us to make that connection that maybe it's an executive function issue because we can't see it. And so we have to identify the underlying concerns.
Okay. Okay, for those of you joining us, if you do have to leave early, I forgot to say this at the beginning. As always, this will be on the Facebook page forever under videos. And I also always put it on YouTube for those who are not on Facebook, and I will email it out to the list and everywhere else. So we're getting some good mornings. So before we get started, for those, I mean, I'm sure there are parents out there who aren't familiar with the concept of executive functioning, even though it's kind of a buzzword, I think, right now, particularly in the autism and ADHD world. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what are executive functioning skills and why are they important?
Sure. Yeah. So, the technical definition is, executive function skills they're kind of an umbrella set of skills or cognitive processes that help one to get from point A to point B. So it helps an individual to monitor and control their thoughts and behaviors and actions, and it facilitates goal-directed behavior. So, if you think about it in an analogy, it's like the CEO of your brain. It's all of the processes that are happening to help you get from I need to do something or I want to do something to actually getting it done. And there's really two kind of different categories of executive function skills. There are the skills that help to achieve a goal. So these are things like your ability to plan, your ability to organize your thoughts, prioritize what you have to do when, your ability to monitor and check that you're following through with achieving your goal. So when you have a goal, and then there are steps that you take to achieve that goal. And then the other area of skills that fall under executive function are the behaviors that guide you to that. So that's being able to follow directions, being able to control your impulses, being able to focus and persist through activities, being able to pay attention, to be patient, and again, to just persist. So you have the actions that you need to take in order to get to a goal. And then there's the behaviors that facilitate your getting to that goal. So it's a pretty complex process. And, what's really important to understand about that is, one student or one child or one individual may have weaknesses in one area of executive function, and then another may have it in another, but both of them may be having a hard time handing in their homework. So you really need to look at exactly what specific processes are affected, and then help to remediate those processes through strategy development. Just to give you like a real life example, I always like to use the example when I do talks like this of, how I got to this talk today, right? So I had the goal of being able to get here with you and to have this conversation with your audience. And so there were a lot of things that had to go work in the background in order to get me from having the goal of participating in this conversation and then actually making it happen, right? So I had to make sure it was in my schedule. I had the time correct. You and I had to facilitate the technology necessary in order for me to log on. I had to get dressed. I had to be there on time. I had to prepare my material in advance of what I wanted to talk about. So, if you have good executive function skills, these things happen spontaneously and automatically and naturally. But for individuals that struggle with executive function skills, they may be late to things a lot. They may show up but not know what they need to have in front of them. They may, not be prepared for their audience. They may forget, or they may not follow through. They may say they're going to be there and then not know how to get on the technology. So, again, that's like a real life example of how this plays out. And it's not something necessarily we see on the outside, but it's, we see that it's a concern through the lack of follow through when it comes to goal directed behavior.
Yeah. I used to teach an adult vocational program, and one of my students, she had some issues, and I the director of the school came to me, and they had real serious concerns because she was showing up, and this was a place that we opened every day at 7. She was showing up at 5 o'clock every day and just hanging out in the parking lot. And that's kind of, we're in a day and an age where people don't like people hanging out in a parking lot,
Right.
Well, it came to pass after talking with her that it was her lack of executive functioning skills, that was literally the only way she could get to school on time, was to be at least an hour or two early. She was completely incapable of planning out the drive and planning out her morning
Right.
to arrive at, like a reasonable or quote unquote normal time.
Yep.
She couldn't do it. So in order to not be late, she had to be 2 hours early.
It's interesting, and so I think it brings up two good points. Number one, executive functioning skills are really universal. So these are skills that you use not only for academics, but also for employment. You use them for social opportunities. You use them for independent living. So, if you have a tough time with executive function, it's going to bleed into your academics, your career, your social life, etc. And we're going to see it become an issue in all these areas. And then when, that specific example of time management is so, it's something we see all the time. Time management is really being able to connect one's actions to a clock or calendar, right? And so sometimes we overestimate or underestimate. We've had a lot of, we've had a similar, but like the opposite end of that with a lot of the college students that we work with. They'll say, I have a 9 o'clock class, and we'll say, okay, what time are you going to get up? And they say 8:55, and we're like, you have to kind of back into that. Well, how are you? How much time do you need to actually get out of bed, do your morning routine, get dressed, have something to eat, pack your bag, walk across campus? That it's unrealistic to think that all of that can happen in 5 minutes. But if individuals have a difficult time with time management, they may not make that connection between what the goal is and then how much in reality time it's going to take on a clock or on a calendar for that to actually get done. Same thing with long-term assignments, right? Like it looks like procrastination. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. When in reality, many times the individuals don't realize that you're not going to be able to get it done overnight because they're not making the connection between how much time you really need and getting that, whatever that thing is, done.
Right. Or the ability to stop and restart a project in the middle of, a lot of people have to, when they start something, they have to complete it. They cannot pause midway, put it away, get it out the next day. All right. So Judy left us a comment, more so than a question, but it's great because it brings me to my next question I wanted to ask you. And she said she's tired of her IEP team saying organizational skills don't get learned until about 20 years old. At what age should we see, halfway decent EF skills showing up? Because we talked about interrupting and impulse control. Obviously, that's not a toddler skill.
Yep. It's a really great question. And I would say, if we look at the structure of school and we use the expectations of what the public school system require of our students, I always say by middle school, students should have a sense of how to organize themselves, because that's what the expectation is of school. If you think about the transition from elementary school to middle school, the students primarily are with the same teacher all day, every day. They don't have a locker. They're not shifting from class to class. The teacher gets to know them very well, and they get to know their teacher very well. And the teacher has the ability to help structure their time and give them a lot of support when it comes to organization. But when they transition to middle school or junior high school, the students tend to have 4, 5, 6 teachers, all that have different systems and routines. They're teaching different areas of content. They have textbooks they have to be responsible for. They have to shift from room to room in a certain amount of time. They have to get to the buses on time. this year I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, and this year I actually saw firsthand what the requirements were when a student goes from elementary school to middle school, and it's a big deal. It really is a big shift. So I think by middle school, especially, we start to see students that have executive function challenges. We start to see that they're starting to forget their homework. They can't get to class on time. They miss the bus many times after school. They forget materials that they're supposed to bring home. They have a hard time navigating the online platforms to get their schoolwork done. So I would say by middle school, it's really essential that the students are able to organize, at minimum, the requirements for various classes in various disciplines for various teachers. So they should be able to say, listen, the transition from elementary school to middle school can be difficult. And so it may not happen immediately. It may take a couple weeks. It may take a couple of months. It may take a whole school year. But they should, if they transition successfully with proper executive function skills, they should be able to say, for math, I have to do this and bring this home, put it in their backpack. And of course, there's always times that you're going to forget things. We all forget sometimes, but consistently, they should be able to know what they need to do for all of their different classes pretty independently, and know how to use the online systems and keep track of what has been handed in and what has not.
Okay. Okay, so as an IEP advocate, one of my kind of standard philosophies has been that if a child or student lacks a skill, you either teach them the skill or you accommodate for them not having the skill. And of course, you can accommodate while teaching as well. Because, it's my firm belief that you can't punish EF skills into a child, and that's what happens is that you didn't bring your homework,
Right.
And then you have lots of kids failing classes for the mere fact that they don't ever hand in homework.
Right.
Can EF skills be taught if there is a deficit in the brain, so to speak? And so let's start with that, because then I'll get to some of the reader questions, because that's kind of along the ways that it's going.
Sure, absolutely. So yes, and to the extent that they can be taught, it's individualized from person to person, right? So, but yes, so and I love that idea of bringing up skill development, right, and remediation versus accommodation, because in my experience, I think sometimes we focus too much on remediation or too much on accommodation, and not enough between the balance of those two things. And really, for students that demonstrate executive function weakness, we need to embed both of those things. We need to help remediate the executive function deficits that they're displaying, but at the same time, they need to be able to access the curriculum and demonstrate knowledge while they're learning those skills. And that's where accommodations are incredibly important. In terms of teaching executive function skills, they can be taught, just like reading can be taught, just like writing, but it's not necessarily the focus of the school. The focus of school is content, right? School is very content driven. So sometimes we need to teach these skills in smaller groups. You'll see it, maybe happening in resource room, or maybe through, additional school time after school, and sometimes in the classroom as well. But, it's really about externalizing those metacognitive processes and making it relevant to the students and their systems that they're using. If it's not coming naturally to them, they need to learn, just like they learn other things, through direct instruction, through modeling, and through practice. Practice, 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 practice. So the first thing you do is you identify what is the issue. My son or daughter is not handing in homework. Okay, why? Are they not handing in homework because they don't know where to find the assignment? Is it because they wait till the last minute? Is it because they do half of it and then forget to do the rest? So identifying what executive function skills they're struggling with, and then externalizing those processes and helping them to develop those so that they can then internalize them. So you're we call it cognitive modeling, right? So you're thinking about, and I can give you an example. My daughter, who is now, just like all of our children, are participating in online learning, and she has 6 to 7 online classes a day, following a schedule. You have to be online for math at 9, you have to be on for social studies at 10, but it changes from day to day. So I could very easily say to her, I could go on her platform. I can find out when her classes are, and I can say, make sure you're on the computer at 9 for math. Make sure you're on the computer at 10 for social studies. But I don't. I want her to learn how to organize and manage her own time. So you say things like, do you have class tomorrow? Yes. Well, how do you know you have class tomorrow? So that you're guiding them in the direction of going through the cognitive processes to figure out, my goal is to know what classes I have tomorrow and when they are, and I have to use my cognitive processes to figure out when those classes are. So this is where that coaching model comes in. So you're asking, when are your classes? How do you know? Where do you find that information? Now that you have that information, how are you going to remember it? And teaching, the three, in my professional experience, the 3 big executive function challenges that we see as students get older are the ability to plan, the ability to organize, and the ability to manage their time. And so, you're teaching and coaching through demonstrating these cognitive skills, how to get to the answer of, how do you plan, how do you create both a long-term roadmap, right, of what you need to do, and how do you create a daily to-do list to figure out what you need to do short term. So this is the big picture, and this is what's right in front of me. How do you organize and manage your materials? How are you going to remember where things are? Where are you going to store information that you have to then efficiently and easily come back to? And then how are you going to utilize time to complete those actions in an efficient manner? So you're doing all of this through modeling and allowing and guiding the kids through practicing those things. Is that helpful?
Yeah, and I think it partially answered Wendy's question, which was, what do you recommend for secondary students who cannot keep track of their assignments during distance learning? But I think you've already answered that. But I would add on to that. So what if you pose these questions? So let's say Wendy says, does all these things with her son. I'm assuming it's a son, or daughter, and the student cannot come up with solutions.
Yeah, and so you're backing into it, right? You don't want to give them the solution, but you also, it's, we call it in educational terms scaffolding. You want to be able to find the place where you can get them to the answer without making it so challenging that they don't know. So you can back yourself into it. If they don't have an answer, you can give them options of different things. The most important thing is, especially with planning and organization, is that the students need to buy into using it, and then they need to connect using it to better performance. So, it's not enough to say, write down all of your assignments and, create a to-do list. You have to help the students see why that's important, how it's helpful, and how it leads to a positive end result because you participated in those behaviors. So, I think, many times our students aren't necessarily making that connection between, if I do this, then I do this. If I create a long-term roadmap of the assignments that I need to get done, then I won't get overwhelmed by too many things at the last minute. That's a hard thing for kids that have executive function difficulties to see. You have to bring that to the forefront and show them. And then when they do plan and they do, there are positive results of it, you have to really clearly identify, because you did this, we got to this end result. It's very easy for our students to get a poor result and say, I'm stupid, I can't do this, that's why I got there. That's what they gravitate towards. So we want to move them towards, but if you change your actions and you change your behaviors, this is not internal. This is something you can change with practice and support.
Okay. Okay, Kizzy's question, and I know that you work privately as a private EF coach, correct? Like parents just hire you to, almost like hiring a counselor, I guess, or another therapist of sorts.
Yep.
But if what interesting, or I shouldn't say just interesting, what effective measures have you seen on an IEP to address these issues?
It's a good question. I think because we do it more privately, we're able to kind of assess the client's needs individually. But again, like I think the most important part in the process is not to just say that Johnny will improve organizational behaviors, but really giving concrete strategies of how organization is going to how Johnny is going to improve his organizational skills. So, is it going to be teaching teaching how to use digital files? Is it going to be teaching how to use a binder with different color-coded sections? Is it going to be teaching using different notebooks? But giving really concrete examples of how organization, how planning is going to be taught, and making it a little bit more discreet rather than general.
Okay. So Georgianne's question, and it's funny because I was just going to ask you this, because I have clients in a local school district, and what districts around here do is there's a time period each day. I want to say it starts around 4th grade, that the classes kind of break up, and we call it WIN, for what I need. And
Okay.
basically the classes break up into differentiated instruction based on that child's needs. So if you need math help, then you get it then, and the gifted kids go to gifted enrichment or whatever. But I do know that a couple of local districts have a WIN session that is EF stuff. They just say, well, you can do the WIN executive functioning. But how do you know? And Georgianne says, but yeah, they have EF classes, but she sees no evidence of topics or skills being taught. So what would you say is the single most impactful skill related to EF that parents can teach?
Wow. It's all so incredibly important. But, first and foremost, I think when teaching executive function skills, we always want to do it with the understanding that it has to be relevant to the student's real life systems. Okay. So teaching executive function skills in a vacuum is going to be very difficult. You can teach organizational skills. This is what organization is. But if they can't connect it to organizing their coursework, then they may not generalize that on their own, and they may not see the relevance, or they may not get their motivation to actually follow through with executive function skills or with executive function strategies, right? So I would say, like the first and foremost, you just want to make sure that you're making it relevant to their lives, giving specific concrete examples of how they can use it and how it would be advantageous to use, and make sure they buy into taking the chance of trying and following through with these strategies. Like I said before, planning, organization, and time management are my top 3. It's hard for me to pick one, but those are your real top 3. I would say, they all lead to independence. If you can't get somewhere on time, you're not going to be able to hold down a job. You're not going to do well in your classes, right? If you can't organize your materials, you're not going to be able to find things to study. You're not going to be able to find your homework assignment, and planning. I guess if I had to pick one, I would say planning is essential, because it's what helps you execute, right? So, being able to look at the big picture And a lot of students, particularly with learning differences, ADHD, in particular, sometimes they're just looking at what's right in front of them, and they're not looking at the big picture. And so if you don't look at the big picture and you don't plan in advance of what needs to happen to get to the end goal, it can affect motivation. It can affect, your ability to get things done on time. So, planning kind of seeps into organization and time management. So I would say, being able to look at the big picture by planning a big roadmap of everything that needs to get done. And then what do I need to do today to get to that end result is probably, I would say what you want to start with.
Okay. A couple of questions about getting these things on IEPs, and just for the record, this is for the viewers. There are certain concepts. I would say that executive functioning is definitely one of them. Social skills and SEL learning, I would say, is another. There are certain concepts that I feel that some schools are trying and some are doing a better job than others. But if you have the means to handle it privately, I would absolutely recommend that you handle it privately. Because if your school isn't already offering it, or if it's a fight to get it, chances are it's not going to be done well. And I'm not saying let the schools off the hook for their responsibilities, but at some point you have to take what I call the path of least resistance. And if it's not a financial hardship, which I certainly acknowledge there are so many people unemployed right now, but if it's not a financial hardship and you can handle these things on your own privately, for a few sessions or a few, whatever it takes, I would recommend doing that. That being said, Robert and Georgianne both are asking us, like, how do we write this up in the IEP and present levels, goals? And, Georgianne asks, how do we get the school districts to explicitly teach something? Of course, any goal listed on an IEP has to be in present levels, identified as an area of need. What are some of the evaluations or assessments that you do for executive functioning?
Yeah, I mean, we as an organization, we assess it more informally, kind of looking at, well, for us, it's more important to see where are our clients specifically struggling in their day to day, and to help to remediate those skills. But on a psychoeducational, you should, or a neuropsychological, you should see things specific to executive function skills. There are questionnaires like the brief that are very common, and so different schools use different things. I think what parents can advocate for the most is that they have a clear idea and sense through formal assessment or a questionnaire how their children are currently functioning in terms of executive function skills, development at a developmentally appropriate level. So, I think, the first step is to request from the school executive function skill scores. And it can be done through the brief, and there are others, and some of the, I think the WISC and the WACE, I think they have also broken down subscores for executive functioning as well, or in certain areas. But just asking and requesting for, an understanding of the current levels of performance and age appropriateness of executive function skills can really be helpful.
And what's your experience been, or what examples do you have of families who have been successful demonstrating to their IEP team that this is a true EF issue and not ill will, not the child doesn't want to, the child's not motivated, that
Yeah.
it's the child truly wants to hand in their homework, but they just lose it every day. They lose their, and then I say, well, we're going to give them I can't even tell you how many IEP meetings I've said, and they say, well, we're going to give them an accommodation of having a booklet. It's a check-in booklet that they have to check in at the end of each day with their assignments, and then they lose the booklet. I'm like, well, you're just giving the child one more thing to lose. It's not going to work. But so what areas, or what ways have you seen success in that?
Well, I think this is the most difficult part, because again, like, these skills can be masked in behaviors that they can look like being lazy or not caring about school or not being motivated. But if you put yourself in the shoes of a student that is struggling with these things, of course they're not going to be motivated. They don't know why they're missing their homework. They don't know why they can't remember to hand it in every day. They don't recognize that, oh, I don't have a system, so that's my issue here. What's happening is they're seeing everybody else, they're perceiving everybody else as being able to do something, and they can't see it. And so, it will 100% affect motivation. It will 100% affect your avoidance to want to be involved in academics. And it can get as serious as things like school refusal. So, assessments are a good start. But, don't forget too, motivation. All motivation is your desire, your level of desire to act on something, right? Well, if you're consistently demonstrating behaviors of being unsuccessful in something, well, you're not going to be motivated to want to continue to do that. So, I always tell parents, take yourself out of it for a second. I've never met a student that has said to me, my goal in life is to be unsuccessful in school, so I'm going to try as hard as I can to be unsuccessful. That it doesn't happen, right? So there's a reason why they're being unsuccessful. And the older they get and the longer they persist with these struggles, the more they're going to develop learned helplessness, where it's just going to be, I'm just going to give up. I'm not going to be successful with this. So why am I going to bother to try? So I think we need to reframe how we identify and define those skills, those behaviors when we see them. When we see a student that appears to be unmotivated, when we see a student who doesn't want to go to school, when we see a student that, and especially, in adolescence and young adulthood, they don't, your social status developmentally at that age is so incredibly important. They don't want to look different from their peers, but they are struggling at a different level. So they're going to do everything they can to avoid looking like they don't know what they're doing in class. That information, what we do with it, we can say the student is lazy, or they don't care about school, or they just don't care, or we can say why. Why are they forgetting their homework every day? And if you try something and it doesn't work, it was the wrong thing. You try something else. It kind of goes into it's an emotional connection that you have with your kids, right? And so sometimes the parents aren't the best person to kind of figure this out with, because you have an emotional connection to your kids. So it's like, we want to do this, right? We want to hold on to our kids. We want to protect them. We want to help them. We don't want them to be uncomfortable. And so, sometimes it's easier to just have somebody from an outside perspective identify with the students that what they're struggling with and how they can move forward from it. We've had lots of clients that come to the office, and the parents, especially in middle school, parents are like, oh, I can't get them to do any homework at home. It's a fight every day. There's tantruming every day. I can't handle this anymore. And they come in and they sit with our coaches, and there's not that emotional struggle. And so they're able to figure it out. So if it constantly is an emotional battle, you may want to consider having a friend or a mentor, or, somebody close to your family, but not necessarily a parent, helping the students to work on these things.
Yeah. And I also would like to add for parents that I interviewed a former teacher, this was several months ago, but she said something kind of pivotal related to this, that no teacher gives homework assignments with the intent of the entire family ending up in tears, or with the intent of stealing your family time every evening, or that's the goal of giving homework is not so that you have a screaming match in your kitchen every day. So if that is happening, because teachers only see the finished product too. So I find, I always tell parents, if it took a lot of struggles and a lot of tears, you need to write that on the assignment, because all teachers see is the finished assignment. And if you don't speak up, they assume that, well, the child did the assignment.
Right.
So, okay. So, just to finish off the IEP question, also with anything, that you ask for, follow up with PWN. If they're declining your request, they need to provide that to you on a PWN. Can EF disorder, can that cause or mimic anxiety disorder?
Such a good question. It's like one of those things that we're always struggling with in the field is like, the chicken and the egg. Is there an anxiety disorder that, then affects academics, or is the challenges in academics affecting, the end result anxiety? And I would say it's definitely intertwined and complex. And if you look at, again, if you just use ADHD as an example, the percentages of comorbidity between ADHD and a diagnosis of anxiety is way higher than it is just ADHD alone. Again, put yourself in the perspective, right? One may occur, and anxiety may occur, and that impedes the ability to get the academics done or to follow efficient executive function processes, or executive function processes may have deficits, and not being able to keep up with your peers and do what you need to do to be successful in school can then cause anxiety. So I think it could go either way. And I will say, I don't know which comes first, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that, but I do know that the instances and the percentages of those two coming together are very, very common.
Okay. Yeah, I just had last week, I talked with the clinical psychologist about OCD and anxiety, and, these things just rarely travel alone is
Correct.
what I would say. They rarely travel alone.
It's
okay.
And I think just one more piece on that is that I think that there's a place for therapeutic services and there's a place for executive function coaching. And so, if children are having a difficult time, a challenging time with both of those things, those are two different things. They're definitely interrelated, but they may need support in both of those things. They may need support in terms of developing coping mechanisms and coping strategies with a therapist, but then they also may need to learn how to break down assignment into smaller pieces, which could work with an executive functioning coach. So, you just have to, every individual is different.
Okay, so a few questions about if a child has identified executive functioning issues and they're going to be addressed. Who does typically do this? Some schools are saying the OT does it, some teachers, some SLPs. What is your experience, or where does a person find an executive functioning coach?
So
I just want to add for the listeners, if you weren't here in the beginning, or the watchers, viewers, she's right outside of New York City. So I think in your more densely populated areas, it's going to be more accessible, but go ahead.
Sure. So, in terms of who's going to do it, just in broad strokes, when we're talking about the schools, the people that are going to do it are going to be the people that have the capacity to individualize instruction or strategy development in some capacity for the students. So all of those people that you mentioned, all of those, their goals as professionals is to help to accommodate and remediate whatever the students are struggling with, maybe in different areas, but there's overlap, right? So there's overlap between OT and speech and special education. And so whomever the people are on the students' educational team that are responsible for individualizing their experience, those are the people that I would rely on. The special education teachers during resource room or in consultation with the classroom teacher. The speech therapists who have a really deep understanding of language and the rules of language. These are people that can be very, very helpful. Even, the school psychologist or the social worker in the school may be able to help with. Again, it's about looking at the individual and finding out exactly what they're struggling with. In terms of finding an executive function coach, for us, it's interesting. We were doing a lot of virtual services as a company. We have about 60 coaches that work with our organization. And we were doing a lot of virtual coaching prior to the pandemic. And but we were also doing a lot of in person. It was actually an easy transition for us to go from in person to virtual, because we are already doing virtual. So in terms of finding somebody privately, sometimes you can find people on the ground in your area, but also there's companies out there like ours that do a lot of virtual work. So we're able to work with students in California, Florida, wherever. And we have coaches all throughout the country, but also a big team of people that can work with kids no matter where they are.
Okay. Great. And I will send out, like I said, I'll send out the video and the link and everything afterwards. The email list will be on the Facebook page. It'll be everywhere. So you'll have her contact information if you're interested in reaching out. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with one last question. Somebody asked about assessments, which, Wendy, we already touched on. So hopefully you heard that. If not, you'll have to go back. But one last question, and then we'll sign off. And that is, can you talk a little bit about goal setting and self-advocacy?
Sure, absolutely.
And students who struggle with setting goals and self-advocating.
Sure. So setting goals is it's important to I think setting goals, sometimes when it's difficult, it goes hand in hand with that motivational piece. Okay, so if a goal is too big and it's hard for a student to get to the end zone without the right levels of support in between, then they might give up. So the actual act of goal setting is a skill that sometimes we have to teach. But then the second step to that is, well, how do we get there, right? So if the goal is to complete the semester, well, there's lots of things that have to happen to get from wanting to complete the semester to actually making it happen. And so goal setting is half of the process. The second half of the process is then breaking down all of the things that need to happen in order to get to that end result, and then building in some sort of a motivational system to get students from, I have to do these 20 things to get to my end goal. Because we tend to, when it comes to motivation, we tend to be really motivated to do something in the beginning, but then we start to lose stamina because it takes too long to get to the end result. So the students need to see, this is the end goal, but these are the small steps to get there. Again, a lot of times they're just seeing what's right in front of them rather than the bigger picture. So identifying the bigger picture and then the small steps to get there is really, really important. This is where self-advocacy and help-seeking skills kind of come into play, because if you're struggling with getting to that end result, you need to be able to identify when you hit a roadblock, identify where you can go to receive help to get over that issue, and then follow through with whatever strategies and supports are available to you to keep you going. So this is like that persistence piece of building frustration tolerance. That is all part of executive function skills. So getting yourself to the end zone is a big part of goal setting and goal completion. And so, when it comes to self-advocacy, students need to know who they are as a learner. We've had lots of clients that come to us in their late teens, early 20s, who have never gone over their neuropsychological report before. So they don't have a sense of why they're struggling, what they're good at, what they're not good at. Again, that self-awareness piece, that metacognitive piece, if it's not coming naturally to them, then they're not identifying they need a note taker in class because their processing is slow, or they have, an issue with attending to a task, unless that information is reviewed with them. And a lot of times people are hesitant to review that information because they don't want the students to feel bad. But I will tell you, in my professional experience, it's a relief to them. It's such a relief to them when they hear, I'm struggling because this is happening. They're like, oh, then they finally have an answer for why they look different from other people. So the first step in self-advocacy is really identifying who you are as a learner, owning it, right? Owning it and saying, okay, this is who I am. Everybody's different. Everybody has different weaknesses. Everybody has different strengths. And then knowing how to identify when that's becoming an obstacle in your environment, so that, and then knowing where to go to ask for help. Again, adolescents and young adults, they don't gravitate towards asking for help, right? They want to do things on their own. They're at a developmental period in their life where they're seeking agency, and they don't want any help from anybody, but they need the help, right? And so we need to teach them that it's okay to receive help. I tell our students all the time, the most successful people in the world don't do it on their own. They have a team of people that are working to help them every day, all day. And so people that offer and accept help are the most successful people in our society. And so that, again, it's just that reframing and rethinking about things, and helping the students to understand who they are, and that it's okay to ask for help and when to do that. It's like one of the struggles that we see all the time is when our clients transition. We work with kids as early as middle school, high school, and then into college. And when we see so many of them transition to college, there's so many wonderful supports on campus for them, but the kids that need those supports are the ones that don't ask for it, because their executive function skills are preventing them from getting themselves from this is what I need to actually following through with it. So self-advocacy and help seeking is really incredibly important. But again, it goes in, I could talk about it for another hour. But it goes into another one of those areas that it is affected by executive function skills, and needs to be directly taught, modeled, and practiced, just like everything else at an early age. Have those kids at the IEP meetings as early as possible with an active voice. With an active voice, they need to be able to ask, "Can you explain this information to me? What is this? What is my next?" It's hard for kids. But if they start to practice those things at an early age, they'll get more comfortable with it.
Right. And yeah, we're so on the same page. One is that I hate when parents hide diagnoses from kids. That's one of my pet peeves. And I always advise that kids should be participating in their own IEP or 504 meetings from the earliest age possible to the maximum extent possible. And that may not be sitting in on an entire meeting,
right,
but they can maybe come in for the first 5 minutes and say, this is something I'm really struggling with, or this is my most important concern today, or something like that. Okay. Wrapping up, how young, what age does should self-awareness be developing?
Well, I think self-awareness develops at a very young age. I'm going to say, I'm not an expert in developmental psychology, but just from my experiences, kids at a very young age can start to connect their behaviors to their behaviors and actions to the consequences. It's how they translate that information. That's important, right? So again, like, I think as early as upper elementary school, we really want to start to pay attention to how kids are perceiving their efforts and what it turns into, and how they're perceiving that. So I think it's less of a question of when, but more of a question of are they perceiving things correctly? Are they making the connection between, if I do this, then it's going to lead to this result. If I don't, then it's going to lead to this result. And that it's more of it's more about your mindset. It's more about how you're perceiving things. It's that fixed versus growth mindset. We could do a whole nother hour on that, right? like if I have the ability to change the outcome based on my actions. That's what we want to strive towards, rather than no matter how hard I try, I'm never going to be successful. We want the former, right? We want to teach them that if, you know, we want to teach them, we want to build frustration tolerance, we want to teach, we want to support them, we want to find that good balance between accommodation and remediation, and we want to reward them by demonstrating, look at what happened, look at this wonderful result after you did this. So, you know, just helping them to make those connections at a young age, upper elementary school for sure.
Okay, great. Okay, Sue, I had just said that at the, what would age is good age to start sitting in? I always say at the earliest age possible to the maximum extent possible. And I have a blog post on that with a whole bunch of examples, because, you know, a child can write a letter, a child can, you know, you can create a video on your phone. It doesn't necessarily mean sitting in on the entire IEP meeting
Right.
if that's hard for them.
Right.
So, okay, tomorrow, tune in at noon tomorrow. I have a pediatric neurologist coming on to talk about, she specializes in ADHD, so that'll be a good follow-up to this, since EF issues tend to be a hallmark of ADHD. So thank you so much, Samantha, for explaining all this today. Like I said, I will send out the video to viewers. If you're just tuning in late, it's on the Facebook page if you want to rewatch it. I will send out her contact information, how to contact her and her agency. And yes, aloha, Robert. Robert got up at 4 a.m. in Hawaii to watch this. So I would say I feel bad for you for getting up at 4 a.m., but you live in Hawaii, so so I don't feel bad for you. If ever I was going to be quarantined, you know, I am very jealous of the people quarantined in Hawaii. So, okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.